The night had a strange, tense feeling to it, the kind that makes your skin prickle before you even know why. Outside, the snowstorm raged like something alive, tearing through the pine trees with a roar that sounded almost like the growl of some unseen beast. The wind didn't just blow. It clawed at the cabin walls, hurling tiny shards of ice against the windows so hard they rattled in their frames. Inside, Jack Morgan sat by the table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The warmth from the cup felt good against his fingers, but his mind wasn't on the drink. His gaze had shifted to Shadow, the big German shepherd who rarely reacted to anything without a reason. And now, the dog's whole posture had changed. Ears standing high, body stiff as stone, nose twitching like it had caught a scent. Jack barely had time to ask, "What is it, boy?" before Shadow gave a sharp, urgent bark. Then another. His paw struck the front door so hard it rattled in, its hinges. That was all Jack needed to see. In one swift motion, he set his mug down, shrugged into his heavy parka, tugged on thick gloves, and slung his rifle over his shoulder. The moment he opened the door, the storm slammed into him like a wall. The icy wind cut at his skin, making his eyes water. Before Jack could even brace himself, Shadow bolted into the swirling white, not looking back once. Jack's boots sank deep into the snow as he followed, each step breaking through the heavy drifts. His lungs burned with the cold, the wind clawing at his hood, trying to push him back. But his eyes never left the dark shape of the dog moving ahead, weaving between the trees with purpose. A glint of light in the beam of Jack's flashlight made him slow. Metal, twisted, broken. As he moved closer, the wreck of an SUV came into view, lying on its side like some wounded animal. Steam hissed from the crushed hood. Shattered glass lay scattered across the snow, glittering like cold, distant stars. Then Jack saw them. Two figures crumpled in the snow a few feet from the wreck. A woman lay curled around a small girl, using her own body to shield the child from the wind. Snow crusted over their faces, their skin frighteningly pale. The little girl wasn't moving. Shadow was already there, pressing himself against the girl's side, his thick fur a barrier against the biting cold. Jack dropped to his knees, brushing snow from the woman's face. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered weakly, unfocused. Jack didn't waste another second. He scooped the girl into his arms. She was frighteningly light and icy cold, then reached for the woman's hand. "Come on," he shouted over the roar of the storm, gripping her tightly. "We're getting you out of here." Somewhere. In the scream of the wind, Jack thought he heard something else, a faint engine cutting off. Watching? Waiting? Snow clung thick to his beard and lashes by the time he pushed open the cabin door again. Warmth rushed out from the wood stove, wrapping around them like a living thing. Jack guided the woman, Sarah, inside, keeping one arm steady on her while still holding the limp weight of the little girl, Emma. Shadow shook himself, sending clumps of snow scattering across the worn plank floor. Jack laid Emma on the couch nearest the fire. Her skin was icy to the touch, her lips pale as paper. He worked fast, stripping off her wet boots, wrapping her in a thick wool blanket, tucking it snug around her shoulders. "Stay with me, kid," he murmured, rubbing her tiny hands between his own. Sarah dropped to her knees beside her daughter, breathing hard, her eyes locked on every movement Jack made. Fear and exhaustion had hollowed her face. Jack's gaze flicked to Shadow, who stood close by, tail low but eyes sharp and watching. Snow still clung to the dog's thick coat in patches. Jack crouched and unbuckled the leather collar to shake it free of ice. That's when he noticed it. A small piece of dark fabric, torn and stiff with frozen blood, wedged under the brass buckle. Jack held it out. "This yours?" Sarah's breath caught. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. "No, but..." I know what it is. That's from the jackets they wear. Calder's men. Jack's jaw tightened. You're sure? I'm sure, she said, voice low but certain. If Shadow got this tonight, it means they're close. The wind moaned against the cabin walls, the sound like something hunting for a way inside. The fire cracked and spat sparks, but even that steady warmth felt fragile now, as if the cold outside had started to seep in. Sarah turned the scrap of cloth over in her hands, her thumb brushing over the dried blood as though trying to read its story. They weren't supposed to be there, she whispered. Emma and I were driving back from my sister's when we saw their trucks parked near the old logging road. I shouldn't have stopped, but I knew that road. It's private land, my land. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on her. Sarah's jaw tensed. We heard a gunshot before we saw anything. Then a man, just a kid, maybe 20, hit the ground. Calder Voss was standing over him with a rifle. I don't know what started it, but I know what I saw. Her voice shook. They saw us too. Calder sent 2 of his men after us. We made it home. But the next day they came back. Told me I could make it easy or hard. Sign over my husband's land. Or, she swallowed. Or maybe Emma and I wouldn't be breathing much longer. Jack knew that name. Calder Voss wasn't just some local thug. His name was burned into reports Jack had read overseas. Smuggling routes, black market weapons. Missing people? I didn't sign, Sarah said. We packed that night, tried to disappear, but I think they've been tracking us ever since. Shadow's head lifted from the rug. His eyes locked on her as though he understood every word. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the shutters like an unspoken warning. The nights that followed were restless. Each time the wind dropped low enough for the forest's silence to settle in, Shadow would lift his head, ears pricked, body taut. Then came the barking, short, sharp bursts aimed at the dark tree line. On the 3rd night, Jack stepped outside with his flashlight. His breath curled in the frigid air. The snow crunched under his boots as he moved along the porch rail, scanning the tree line. The beam of light caught something. Shallow tracks in the snow leading toward the slope. Fresh. He knelt, brushing, snow away, wide spacing, someone moving fast but not running, close enough to watch. Jack followed the trail for a short way before stopping. Half buried in the drift lay a spent rifle casing, still warm enough to melt a thin ring in the snow. When Adwaite, he returned to the porch. Shadow was pawing furiously at a mound by the steps. Snow sprayed in bursts until his teeth caught something solid. He pulled it free, a small leather pouch, edges stiff with frost. Jack crouched, took it from the dog, and pried it open. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a black USB stick. Jack glanced toward the forest, its shadows deep and silent. Who the hell's been out here, boy? The forest swayed under the weight of the wind, giving no answer. The USB was icy cold in his palm. Jack wiped it with his sleeve, set it on the table, and plugged it into his old laptop. A folder appeared, ledger. Inside were rows of numbers, shipment details, photographs of crates marked with foreign symbols, stacks of rifles in oil paper, and men. Blurry faces, heavy coats, snowmobiles loaded with illegal cargo. Sarah's voice was sharp with recognition. That's them! Calder's crew! One file was a map marked with GPS coordinates. 3 red circles, one less than 10, miles from where they sat. This isn't just smuggling, Jack muttered. They're moving weapons. If they know I've seen this, Sarah began. They already know, Jack cut in, shutting the laptop hard. He went to his cabinet and pulled out a battered field radio. Static hissed. If I can reach my friend in state enforcement, we might... The signal cracked, then died. The storm had swallowed the airwaves. Until the storm passes, Jack said. We sit tight, and we make sure we're ready if they get here first. Shadow, lying near the door, lifted his head. At the sound of the wind, the storm eased by morning, leaving the forest still and heavy with fresh snow. Jack stepped onto the porch, cold biting through his coat. Shadow was already near the tree line, nose low, tail rigid. He looked back once, then moved forward with purpose. "He's got something," Jack said, pulling on his pack. Sarah followed, scarf tight around her face. They moved through the drifts, Shadow weaving between pines, his pace quickening. Jack recognized that gait, the same scent from the torn fabric. Nearly a mile in, the trees opened to a small clearing. Half buried under snow stood a weathered hunting shack leaning with the wind. No smoke, no sound, but the wrong kind of stillness hung over it. Shadow circled wide and vanished behind the shack. Jack crept closer, camera ready. Through a cracked window, he saw crates, a snowmobile with fresh fuel, and a wall lined with motion sensor cameras. Footprints crisscrossed the floor inside. Crash from the far side made him tense. Then Shadow appeared, knocking over a metal barrel. Perfect distraction. Jack snapped photos of the crate serial numbers and camera gear before retreating to the tree line. Shadow rejoined them, tongue lolling, snow clinging to his muzzle. "Good work, boy," Jack murmured, giving him a quick pat. Sarah's eyes were wide, scanning the silent shack. "We need to go," she whispered, "before they come back." The snow outside glowed faintly, under a thin moon, the forest quiet except for the creak of branches. Jack sat at the table cleaning his rifle, the USB, resting in its plastic wrap beside him. Shadow lay near the door, head down, but eyes open. The knock came soft, almost polite. Jack froze. Shadow's head shot up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The door burst inward before Jack could reach it. Two men in heavy coats stormed in, rifles up. A third stayed on the porch, scanning the tree line. "Easy, Morgan," one of them said, his voice muffled behind a scarf. "We just want what you found." Sarah appeared in the hall. Emma clutched to her chest. Jack's eyes flicked toward her just a fraction of a second, but enough. One of the men lunged, slamming him against the wall. The rifle knocked from his hands. "Go!" Jack barked at Sarah. She darted into the kitchen, disappearing with Emma. Shadow erupted from his spot, a blur of black and tan. His jaws clamped onto the wrist of the man holding Jack, forcing a scream as the rifle clattered to the floor. Jack drove his elbow into the attacker's jaw, scooped up the USB from the table, and dove for his sidearm. The second man raised his weapon. Too slow, Jack fired once, the bullet punching into the wood beam inches from the man's head. "Next one's not a warning," Jack said, voice flat. The men backed toward the door. Outside, their leader cursed and yanked them into the dark. Snow swallowed the sound of their retreat. Shadow stood in the doorway, breath steaming in short bursts, tail low, button wavering, his eyes tracking until the last dark figure melted into the trees. The wind hadn't died, but Jack wasn't willing to wait. He slung his pack over one shoulder, zipped his coat to Thichen, and handed Sarah an extra wool hat. "We leave now." Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the frost-glazed windows. "In this. What if we stay, they'll come back?" Jack cut in. His tone left no room for argument. Shadow paced by the door, tail twitching, nose to the gap where the cold leaked in. When Jack opened the door, the dog shot forward, breaking trail through. Knee-deep drifts. The forest was a tunnel of white branches, heavy with snow bending low over their path. Shadow moved fast but deliberate, veering left and right as if reading a map only he could see. Twice he stopped, ears prick-cricked, before taking a sharp detour through thicker trees. "They'll use the road to set up an ambush," Jack said over his shoulder. "We're not giving them that chance." Sarah clutched Emma close, following in Jack's boot tracks. The child's face was buried in her mother's scarf, small breaths warming the wool. Hours blurred into a steady grind of cold and silence. The only sound, the crunch of snow and the wind dragging through the pines. Then, Faint at first, came another sound. The low hum of engines. Shadow broke from the trees, leading them out onto a narrow service road. Ahead, the green and white sign of the state police post glimmered through the haze of dawn. Jack's breath came hard, but his voice was steady. We made it. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnished wood and winter coats damp from melting snow. Jack sat beside Sarah Hatt, the defense table, Shadow resting quietly at his feet, head on his paws. Emma sat with a family liaison officer a few rows back, swinging her legs. The prosecutor's voice was steady as he introduced the evidence. The USB's contents, ledgers, photographs, GPS coordinates flashed on a monitor for the court to see. The images of rifles, crates, and marked maps drew a low murmur from the gallery. Sarah took the stand, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She told the story from the night on the logging road to the moment Jack found her in the snow. Her voice wavered only once when she mentioned Emma's name. Then came the final blow. Jack's friend from the state enforcement office took the stand, confirming that the USB had been recovered under suspicious circumstances and matched ongoing investigations into Calder Voss. In the back of the courtroom, Calder shifted in his seat, jaw tight. When the judge signaled to the buffs, two uniformed officers moved in. Calder's glare locked on Jack, cold and unblinking as the cuffs bit into his wrists. The sharp click of metal echoed like a gunshot in the hushed courtroom. Reporters crowded the steps outside after the verdict. Cameras clicked as Sarah, Jack, and Emma emerged. Shadow walked at Sarah's side, calm, ears forward. "Local hero," one reporter called out. "How does it feel knowing your dog may have cracked the case?" Jack gave a small smile, resting a hand on Shadow's head. "He's not just my dog. He's our protector." Shadow blinked up at him, unmoving, as if the words were simply the truth he'd always known. Spring crept over the mountains slowly, like a cautious visitor. The snow thinned, revealing patches of damp earth where new grass pushed through. Therever ice broke with deep echoing cracks, sending shards drifting downstream. Jack's cabin smelled of fresh coffee and pine resin. Sarah tended a small garden by the porch, Emma chasing a pair of early butterflies through the yard. Shadow lay on the steps, head high, watching. Life had settled into something steady. Jack took repair, jobs in town. Sarah started helping at the library, and Emma began school without the shadow of fear in Harry's. Yet every evening, as the sun slid behind the ridges, Shadow would rise. He'd make a slow circuit of the yard, nose to the wind, pausing at the edge of the trees, as if listening for something beyond human hearing. Sometimes he'd glance back at the cabin and Jack would lift a hand in silent thanks. On a late April evening, the sky burned orange over the peaks. Shadow stood at the crest of the yard, the light outlining the curve of his back, the fur along his shoulders catching gold. His ears twitched, his breath steady, his stance unyielding. Sarah stepped onto the porch, wrapping an arm around Jack. Emma's laughter carried on the soft breeze. "He's still watching over us," Sarah said quietly. Jack nodded. "He'll ways will." In the fading light, Shadow didn't move. He was more than a dog now. He was the winter sentinel, keeping his post long after the storm had passed.